Morning, folks. Welcome back. It is Friday, May the 1st. So, for those of you that are not aware, today is International Workers' Day. So, happy International Workers' Day to all of you. It is quite a big event outside of North America. We have Labor Day, which is in September, I believe. But around the world, International Workers' Day is celebrated as a day commemorating workers of all industries and things like that. So let's say Happy Workers' Day to those, your family members, and everyone around the world. Wishing everyone a Happy Workers' Day. Anyways, um, we are going to start today Unit 4. This is the last unit. So we're almost there. We are going to look at the response to globalization. So we just spent this semester looking at historical globalization, economic globalization, your identity in globalization all the way back in September, and how they all these different aspects of globalization. So now the last unit is going to be how you or we as a collective should respond to globalization. Um, so we're going to focus our attention on the question, should I as a citizen respond to globalization? So throughout these next few weeks, we are going to address this question and see your response to it. So I don't think, and if I no, I wouldn't have. None of you would have a paper copy of this, so you're going to have to find this copy on our D2L. So just a refresher. I'm just going to go to it here really quick. Just give me a second. So I'm on our main screen. I see the posts for the exam, so don't forget to do that. So you're going to go to resources, content, and then it's going to show all of the units that we've done so far. You're going to scroll all the way to the bottom where it says student activity guides, and there are all of them, minus the first one. So the top of it is activity 3, then there is part 2, and the third one on the list, it's unit 4. So you just click that and then it opens up. So you have a choice. Either you can print this out if that's beneficial for you, or you can just go through it online. But I leave that totally up to you. Anyways, that's how you would get to this one. Keep working on the past booklets and just getting them into me whenever you get them finished. Anyways, let's move on. So this is student activity 26. We're going to focus on something, the quality of life. Because the way that we respond to globalization, it impacts our very existence, our quality of life, how we live our lives, dictates how we respond to globalization. So we'll go through some key things today to help you understand it. This is page 3 in the new booklet. So let us start with this idea of the standard of living. Very important concept to understand. This measures our level of comfort based on material things we can buy, such as goods, services, and luxuries. So in Canada, I would say the majority of us have a pretty good standard of living. Again, I'm not speaking in absolutes because there's people in Canada who have a very, very poor standard of living. But for the most part, Canadians do have a fairly good standard of living. We can go out and there's an ample supply of goods and services for us to have. Maybe not now because a lot of things are closed. And we also have luxury. So if a person is well off in North America, for example, they have a pretty good standard of living. You would see a fairly good standard of living in a lot of developed countries. So North America, Western Europe, and Australia, for example, just to name a few, not all. Now, To flip that, another important concept that I don't want you to get mixed up with standard of living. So these two concepts, do not mix them up. Quality of life. This is different from the standard of living because it also includes non-material things that contribute to our well-being, such as political and religious freedom, access to healthcare, and a clean environment. So again, if we're going to use Canada as an example, I would say in Canada, and I'm not speaking in absolutes, that the majority of people have a very good quality of life. In Canada, you and I and everybody has political and religious freedoms. That is guaranteed us through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that is a check. Access to healthcare, we all have access to universal healthcare. So you, me, anyone, we can go to the doctor, we can go to the hospital and be treated for whatever ails us. So we have access. So again, another check. Clean environment, well, that's up in the air. Some people argue that we do, some people argue that we don't, and that just, for the most part, one could argue that our environment is clean. We do have a lot of regulations. We do have a lot of programs that are geared towards keeping the environment clean. So for example, if we're going to take Calgary as an excellent example, I don't know when this happened, so maybe it's been a part of your entire lives, maybe not. But the bins that people have in front of their houses. So there was a blue one, there was a black one, and now there's a green one. When I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. There was just trash. You put them in a trash can, and then it gets picked up and shipped off to the landfill. But now we have these different bins. So you have recycling, and you have compost, and then you have waste that goes to the landfill. That's an attempt to clean the environment and to keep it up so that our quality of life stays at a constant or even on a slight improvement. In Canada, we have quite a lot of national parks that are protected by federal law or provincial law too, because we have provincial parks as well. That is also really good, and it does help to keep the environment at a constant as well. So, if we were to look at the quality of life index, this is from 2011, so it's pretty dated. And if you are curious, we can look up a more recent, because this doesn't even have all the countries in it. But you can see, like I said, North America, Western Europe, Australia, and Japan as well. The quality of life is quite good. So remember, when we talk about quality of life, it does include standard of living, so goods, services, and luxuries, but it also includes political, religious freedoms, access to healthcare, and clean environment. So the greener areas, they have a far better standard of living. The lower we go towards the more darker reds, that is where the quality of life is a little bit lower, and there's a lot more people suffering. Or look at historical globalization and economic globalization. You can kind of see, when we were in historical globalization, I introduced the concepts of colonialism and imperialism. Well, now I hope you can see these are the fruits to bear of imperialism and colonialism. The majority of Europe is enjoying a fairly good quality of life, and their former colonies are not so. So we can see, and having this opinion, that one I'm explaining to you right now, it does put you in a certain category, and that is one of anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, because you can see the effects of it. The majority of the red countries are found in Africa, where we found the majority of Africa was at one point in history a colony of a European power. And then the other red ones are also located in Central and in Southeast Asia. Again, colonies of the Europeans. So that's one way of looking at it, and I hope that you can kind of see it with this index. So let's move on, though. I don't want to get bogged down on that. So the quality of life is hard to define because it's influenced by society's beliefs and values. So again, when we look at that, when we look at this index here, it's kind of hard to have a certain, like, a structured set of rules and say, okay, this is how we're going to judge it, because every country judges things a little bit differently, and every country's beliefs and values are structured a little bit differently. So, like, the ideas of access to healthcare or political and religious freedoms, these differ depending on places. So, for example, in Canada, Aboriginals value the right to practice their traditional ways of life. Now, their traditional ways of life are very different from yours and mine and the rest of people in Canada, because Canada is a nation born of immigrants. Yours truly is the son of two immigrants. The way that we all practice our lives is different. So if we look at the Aboriginal point of view, they value the right to practice their traditional ways of life. And in some ways they cannot, because it doesn't fit into a certain structure of Canadian society. And that has impacted the way that they can express themselves. Yes, they have that right protected, but doesn't necessarily mean that they can do it. It does require a lot more input and structuring on the way that it can be done. And these sort of things are limited in a lot of ways. So let's move on. We're still on the idea of quality of life, though. So gross national happiness. We talked about this in economic globalization last week. So another key measure of the quality of life is happiness of a country. So we talked about GDP as a way of gauging how a country is growing and if it's economically prosperous and things like that. And that's usually connected to happiness. If a country is wealthy, that means it can increase the quality of life. That also means that people can have a good standard of living because they have access to wealth and income that they can not necessarily use on just what their needs, but also what they want. Make sense? Because needs are something that you need. Whereas if there is that extra resources kicking around, then a lot more of your wants can be taken care of. So, but when we talk about gross national happiness, that kind of takes a step away from GDP and doesn't really focus on that. This is attained by the balancing of material needs and spiritual needs. So the gross national happiness, that measure, it comes from the country of Bhutan, which is in Southeast Asia, sort of near India and Burma, so in that sort of area, or Myanmar, if you want to call it by its official title. So that country, it's the people there. If you look at their quality of life, it's probably not as high, like access to certain things. However, they are some of the most happiest people on earth, and it's all related to this idea of balancing the material and the spiritual together, and finding that nice balance in between. And looking at your life and thinking, okay, what do I need to be happy and what do I want to be happy? So these sort of things are related to gross national happiness. So on slide 8, here is a map of world happiness. So the red is leaning towards happy, whereas the yellow leaning towards not so happy. So again, we see places in North America and Europe, they tend to be a lot more happier. Whereas in other places, you can see it's not so. And I mean, if you look at the quality of life index and you look at that map on slide 5 and then you look at the map on slide 8, you can kind of see that the colors kind of match up. So we can't be blind to the fact that if quality of life is poor and access to those sort of necessities in life don't exist, well, of course, that person is going to be very not happy. I'll give you a personal example. When I moved to Edmonton in 2016 to go to the university there, and Edmonton is a very nice city. I enjoyed my time there. Yes, it was lonely. My family wasn't there, but I had to go. So when I was looking for a place to live, I went to almost a lot of different places to look and see, and some places were extremely nice, and some places were not so nice, to be very honest with you. And I remember thinking this, and it kind of goes along the lines of what we're talking about when we look at these two maps, is that a person's surroundings makes them happy. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to be staying here for 2 years at least to be going to school, I want a place where I can feel happy when I return. It's a matter of mental health. It's a matter of looking at my surroundings and know that I'm comfortable. I'm happy where I am. So when we look at the quality of life index, and these places have a lower quality of life, and then you look at happiness, and their happiness level is lower, it's all related to their surroundings. And then if we were to pull that string a little bit farther, then we get back to things like imperialism and colonialism. And when we look at economic globalization, we can take that and really run with that one too, because it's all interconnected and linked together. So it is something to be aware of. So one way that the world tries to help balance that quality of life and try to help bring it up for those who are not who are at a lower level is through things like foreign aid. So aid and relief efforts help people in developing countries raise their standard of living. So the goods and services, knowledge and skill, and financial assistance. Because it's not just a payout of here's money to go buy something. It's also this idea of, okay, let's give these developing countries the tools necessary so that they don't have to rely on foreign aid. They can stand on their own 2 feet and move up and become developing countries. And then in turn, they can also start to provide aid for other countries as well. I think an excellent example of that would be places like Japan. Japan, after the Second World War, was requiring a lot of foreign aid. It had suffered a lot of damage during the Second World War. You'll wait till grade 11, wait till next year, and you'll talk about the Second World War. And its economy started off at ground zero. So the way that nowadays everything is made in China, the 1950s, everything was made in Japan. Your lower quality goods. However, that helped their economy to boost, and now Japan is one of the largest and most strongest economies in the world, and they are producing some very high quality goods. So they're an example of a story of going from aid to being one that can now provide aid for other people. So 80% of Canadian aid is distributed from the CIDA, the Canadian International Development Agency. So we have created an agency that's specifically designed to distribute the aid that our country provides to other countries around the world. So it is something that federally we have structured in our government. So it is something to be aware of, and it is something a positive, because it's not just throwing aid around unsupervised or without structure. It is a very structured thing. There are criteria that need to be met that relate to things like international law. So we're not just giving goods and money and resources to, say, warlords who are trying to overthrow a country, or who are using illegal means of gaining power. No, it's a structured thing that we have here. So that would be the CIDA would be associated with this idea of intergovernmental organizations. That would more be just Canada, but then Canada is also part of intergovernmental organization, or IGOs. So IGOs make up are made up of independent countries working together for a common purpose. So what the CIDA would do is they could link their programs with other countries who have similar sort of agencies set up. They're used to provide aid and help to countries who have specific goals they want to reach. They're also there in case countries are faced with natural disasters, so things like earthquakes or tsunamis or hurricanes or these sort of things. They promote economic, political, cultural, and social equality. So their job is to essentially raise the quality of life and the standard of living in countries that are requiring assistance. So one of the most famous intergovernmental organizations is United Nations. So if you're looking on slide 11, this map here shows you the countries of the world and when they joined the United Nations. So a lot of them joined in 1945 when it was created. So that's where the light blue comes in. And then slowly you see in the 1950s to 70s, a lot of other countries, especially a lot of African countries, joined the United Nations. The reason that it happened so late for them is because of decolonization. So after World War II, in the 1950s to the 1970s, a lot of African nations gained independence, either because the Europeans left and said, okay, you can run your country now. You're in charge now, so see you later. Or they had revolutions and they overthrew their government. So places like Algeria and Angola, for example, they had revolutions where they kicked out the French in Algeria and they kicked out the Portuguese in Angola. And then you can see it progresses even onwards as well. The purple, that's a lot related to the fall of the Soviet Union. So a lot of the purple, they used to be former Soviet republics. Now they are independent countries, so they've joined the United Nations. That is probably the most famous IGO. Another one is the World Trade Organization. We talked about that a few weeks ago. So again, a lot of countries, actually every country, is either a part of or is somewhat a part of or is related to it in some way. Another example is the European Union. So this map on slide 13, it needs to be changed actually because the United Kingdom has officially left the European Union, the whole Brexit thing. So the European Union, this is obviously it's a European organization where countries, they essentially help each other with lower trade barriers and allows free movement for European Union citizens between countries. So they would have an EU passport that would allow them to just go, kind of like what we have with the United States and our border. So slide 14, I want you to watch this video. It's 9 minutes long. You're going to answer questions 1, 2, and 3. It's A Hungry Planet, so I'll let you watch that. But let's move on. So foreign aid, and this is non-government organizations, so NGOs. We talked about that before. So NGOs are private charities. So don't get that mixed up with IGOs. IGOs are intergovernmental. NGOs are private charities that provide international aid, promote economic equality, or protect the environment. So these are groups like Amnesty International, the Red Cross, or Doctors Without Borders. So these are organizations that are created by people with specific goals in mind. So if you're a part of Amnesty International, you are looking out for human rights. You are going around and you are looking up human rights violations and things like that. So I'll find a link to their website and I'll put it in the description. I can show you it. The Red Cross, again, they're more concerned about aid and medical aid to places that are suffering with either disease outbreaks, war, or natural disasters. And then Doctors Without Borders also, they're a group of doctors, organization that goes to places usually where disease outbreaks or war, civil war, even war, not just civil, or natural disasters, and they provide aid. Another example would have been like, say, something like Greenpeace, where they're protecting the environment from being destroyed, either the animals or ecosystems and things like that. So some NGOs operate out of developed nations. So you'll find a lot of them, they come from Western Europe or North America, and their focus is on developing countries. So others fund or run development projects at local levels in communities. So the other side is they will start in a country. So for example, in, I believe it was 2011, I could be wrong, there was an earthquake that happened in Haiti. So it devastated the country and the country's economy, and they're still trying to recover from it. So what a lot of Haitians did that were living outside of Haiti is they came back to their country and they started developing programs for their own people, to boost their economy, to just bring a better quality of life and standard of living to the people after such a tremendous economic disaster related to the earthquake. So it does start off that way as well too. So again, now we're going to look at foreign aid and the impact of transnational corporations, or TNCs. The impact of globalization and TNCs on rural communities has led to an international movement to promote resource rights. So what that all is related to this idea of exploitation of the environment and resources. So we can talk about, we spent a lot of time talking about this when we talked about pipeline building in Canada and Indigenous people's rights to the land and their view of the land. So that would be an example of the impact of transnational corporations on things like foreign aid. So local people want control of what happens to their land and resources. This movement shows connection between access to resources and the people of developing nations being able to raise their standard of living. So one of the things that it was actually on your test too, is that transnational corporations, they do tend to take the profits out of a country, and they tend to take the resources out of a country to sell. So what local communities and rural people will do is they will try to keep that in an attempt to raise the standard of living so that they have access to it and not the resources and profits finding its way outside of the country. So these are just examples of how quality of life is impacted by NGOs, IGOs, and TNCs. So hopefully that made sense to you. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do today, and then this video is done, is there's going to be a list in your booklet of these 18 words. So you can use your knowledge of social studies, your notes, and the internet as a reference to match the terms below to the correct in the correct order of these sort of things. So CIDA, advocacy, boycott, refugee, petition, pandemic, well, you should probably know what that one is now, empower, quality of life, genetically modified, genocide, prisoner of conscience, grassroots organization, responsible citizen, authoritarian, universality, boycott, buyout, or boycott, ethical, and ratify. So those words match with the definitions in your booklet. So just match them up. Those are words that we're going to be using and that you should be aware of, not just in social studies, but also in the greater world. So, for example, number 6, we're living it right now. So if you didn't know what a pandemic was before March, well, now you're living it. So now that word has a memory attached to it. And I'm pretty sure you've heard of number 9, genetically modified. So genetically modified foods. That's another thing. Again, you should be aware of these things. Boycotts, grassroots organizations as well, these sort of things. Okay, so that's it for today. Continue working on your written response, your test, and your booklet from last unit. So don't think that just because I made this video today, you have to do this stuff today, like right now, like you have no choice but to do it right now. No, you can work on the stuff before and then come and meet this. This will just be here waiting for you so you can see this beautiful face whenever you're done Unit 3, and you can just come join us here in Unit 4. The weather's great over here. That was a joke. But you guys didn't laugh at my jokes when we were in class anyway, so I don't expect you to laugh now, and I wouldn't even know if you did. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to let you just take this now. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe. I know yesterday the premier was saying that things are going to start to open up, which is great news. But remember, let's not be too eager too quickly. Remember to stay safe, practice good hygiene, wash your hands and all that fun stuff. And I will see you Monday. Enjoy your weekend, and if you have any questions, please email me. And remember, I also said this yesterday, I'll say it again today. If you wanted to set up a time to have a one-on-one chat about any of the assignments or anything that you're concerned about, please let me know and we can set that up. Okay? I'll see you Monday.